The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek as Rose Hampton clutched her bleeding shoulder, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps as she ducked into a narrow alley between the general store and the saloon. The year was 1876, and the small Montana town that had once been her sanctuary was now a death trap. She pressed her back against the rough wooden wall, her blue calico dress now stained with crimson, wondering how her life had spiraled into such chaos in a matter of days. The sound of approaching footsteps made her heart hammer against her ribs. Rose closed her eyes, silently praying for a miracle as the heavy boots drew closer. When she opened them again, she found herself staring at the barrel of a Colt revolver and beyond it, into the most piercing green eyes she'd ever seen. "Please," she whispered, "they'll kill me." The stranger studied her, his sun-weathered face betraying no emotion. His dark hat cast shadows across features that might have been handsome if not for the long scar running along his jawline. Dust clung to his worn leather coat, and his gun hand was steady as death itself. "Who's after you?" he asked, his voice low and rough like gravel. Before Rose could answer, shouts erupted from the main street. The stranger glanced over his shoulder, then back at her. In one swift motion, he holstered his gun and grabbed her arm. "Come with me if you want to live," he said, pulling her deeper into the alley. Rose stumbled after him, wincing at the pain in her shoulder. "Who are you?" "Name's Ryder Ingram," he replied without looking back. "Don't ask about the rest, miss." "I won't," she promised, breathless. "If you stay." For a moment, something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps before his expression hardened again. "Let's get you somewhere safe first." Ryder led her through a maze of back alleys until they reached a modest stable at the edge of town. He whistled softly, and a magnificent black stallion lifted its head in response. "This is Shadow," he said, quickly saddling the horse. "He's the fastest thing on 4 legs in 3 territories." Rose watched him work, taking in the practiced efficiency of his movements. The wound in her shoulder throbbed, and she felt lightheaded from blood loss. "We need to see to that shoulder before we ride out," Ryder said, noticing her pallor. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a flask and some clean cloth. "This will hurt." Rose gritted her teeth as he cleaned the wound with whiskey. "It's just a graze," he muttered. "Lucky." "I don't feel lucky," she replied, her voice strained. Ryder's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "You're alive, ain't you? Now, who's trying to put you in the ground, Miss?" "Hampton. Rose Hampton." She hesitated, wondering how much to tell this dangerous stranger who had suddenly become her only ally. "Harrison Reed's men. He believes I stole something from him." "Did you?" Rose met his gaze steadily. "Yes." Ryder finished bandaging her shoulder and helped her onto his horse. "That's all I need to know for now," he said, mounting behind her. "We'll talk more when we're clear of town." As they galloped away from Redemption Creek, Rose felt the solid warmth of Ryder's chest against her back, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. For the first time in days, despite the pain and fear, she felt something close to safe. They rode hard until sunset, following the winding path of Serpentine Creek westward into the foothills. Ryder finally slowed Shadow to a walk when they reached a small clearing sheltered by towering pines. "We'll rest here tonight," he announced, dismounting and helping Rose down. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her when her feet touched the ground. Ryder caught her arm, steadying her. "Thank you," she murmured, uncomfortably aware of his proximity and the strength in his hand. He nodded curtly and set about making camp with the efficiency of a man who had spent most of his life outdoors. Rose watched as he gathered wood for a small fire, tended to Shadow, and unpacked some basic provisions. "You should eat something," he said, offering her jerky and hardtack. "You've lost blood." Rose accepted the food gratefully, suddenly aware of her hunger. As she ate, She studied her mysterious savior. Ryder Ingram moved with the natural grace of a predator, alert even in repose. The gun at his side seemed as much a part of him as his right arm. "You're wondering if you made a mistake. Trusting me," he said abruptly. Rose started. "How did you know?" "It's what I'd be thinking in your place." He poked at the fire with a stick. "You don't know me from Adam. Could be I'm worse than whatever you're running from." "Are you?" His green eyes reflected the dancing flames as he looked up at her. "No. But a smart woman wouldn't take my word for it." "I don't have many options at the moment," Rose replied honestly. "And you didn't have to help me back there. You could have walked away." Ryder grunted non-committally. "Get some rest, Miss Hampton. We've got a long ride ahead tomorrow." "Where are we going?" "I've got a cabin. About 2 days' ride from here, deep in the mountains. Reed's men won't find you there." Rose wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "Why are you helping me?" Ryder's expression darkened. "I told you don't ask." "And I said I wouldn't," she replied softly. "If you stay." Their eyes met across the flames, and something unspoken passed between them. Finally, Ryder nodded. "I'll stay, at least until I know you're safe." That night, Rose slept fitfully, her dreams filled with gunshots and the memory of Harrison Reed's cold, cruel smile. She woke with a start before dawn to find Ryder already up, standing at the edge of the clearing with his back to her, a rifle cradled in his arms as he scanned the horizon. "Did they find us?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep and fear. He turned, and in the gray pre-dawn light, his face looked carved from stone. "No, just being cautious." His gaze softened slightly as it fell on her. "How's the shoulder?" Rose moved it experimentally and winced. "Sore, but better." "Good. We should move out soon. There's coffee if you want it." The day unfolded in a blur of motion as they rode through increasingly rugged terrain. Ryder remained vigilant, occasionally doubling back or taking seemingly random turns to throw off any potential pursuers. By midday, the June sun beat down mercilessly, and Rose felt herself wilting in the heat. "There's a stream up ahead," Ryder said, noting her discomfort. "We'll rest there for a bit." The cool water was a blessing. Rose splashed her face and drank deeply while Ryder refilled their canteens. As she straightened, she caught him watching her, an unreadable expression in his eyes. "What is it?" she asked. He shook his head. "Nothing. Just thinking we should change that bandage." His hands were surprisingly gentle as he unwrapped the cloth from her shoulder. Rose winced as the fabric stuck to the dried blood. "Sorry," he murmured, working carefully. "Looks clean. No sign of infection. You heal fast." "My father was a doctor," Rose explained. "He always said I had good blood." "Where is he now?" "Dead. 5 years ago. Influenza." Ryder nodded, his face solemn. "My condolences." "What about your family?" Rose asked before she could stop herself. His expression closed like a door slamming shut. "I thought we agreed no questions." "Right," she said softly. "I'm sorry." They continued their journey in silence, climbing higher into the mountains as the day wore on. By nightfall, they had reached a narrow pass that Ryder said would save them half a day's travel. "Too dangerous to navigate in the dark, though," he added. "We'll camp here and cross at first light." That evening, as they sat by another small fire, Rose decided to offer Ryder at least some explanation for the trouble she'd brought to his doorstep. "Harrison Reed is a banker," she began without preamble. "He owns half the businesses in Redemption Creek, including the hotel where I worked as a housekeeper. What I took from him was a ledger, a record of all the illegal dealings he's been involved in for the past decade." Ryder's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were intent on her face. "Why would you risk your life for that?" Rose stared into the flames. Reed murdered my friend Eliza. She was compromised by his son, and when she threatened to tell everyone, they silenced her, made it look like suicide. Her voice hardened. The sheriff is in Reed's pocket. No one would listen to me, but with that ledger, I have proof of the kind of man he really is. So it's justice you're after, Ryder said quietly. Yes. Rose looked up at him. Is that so wrong? No. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. But it's dangerous. Men like Reed don't take kindly to having their secrets exposed. I'm aware of the risk, she replied. I just didn't expect them to catch up to me so quickly. Ryder added another log to the fire. Where is this ledger now? Rose hesitated, then reached into the bodice of her dress and withdrew a small key. I mailed the ledger to myself at the post office in Silverton. This is the key to the box. Ryder raised an eyebrow. Smart. It seemed safer than carrying it with me. She tucked the key away again. Once I retrieve it, I plan to take it to the federal marshal in Denver. Reed has no influence there. That's a solid plan, Ryder acknowledged. But Denver's a long way from here, and Reed's men won't give up easily. I know. Rose met his gaze steadily. That's why I need your help. Ryder was silent for a long moment. Get some sleep, he finally said. We've got an early start tomorrow. Rose wanted to press him for an answer, but something in his expression warned her against it. She settled down on her bedroll, turning her back to the fire, acutely aware of the man sitting just a few feet away, a man who held her fate in his hands. She woke sometime in the deepest part of the night, disoriented. The fire had burned low, casting everything in ghostly shadows. Across the dying embers, Ryder sat with his back against a rock, his eyes open but distant, as if seeing things far beyond their small camp. You should sleep too, she said softly. He didn't startle at her voice, merely shifted his gaze to her face. Can't. Old habits? What haunts you, Ryder Ingram? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He was quiet so long that Rose thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so softly she almost didn't hear, he said, Everything I've done, and everything I've failed to do. Rose sat up, drawing her blanket around her shoulders against the mountain chill. We all carry regrets. Some heavier than others. His voice was flat, emotionless. Is that why you're out here alone? Punishment? Ryder's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. You ask a lot of questions for someone who promised not to. You're right. I'm sorry. Rose lay back down, turning away from him again. After a moment, she heard him sigh. It wasn't always like this, he said, his voice so low she had to strain to hear. I had a different life once. A good one. Rose remained still, afraid that any movement might break the spell, might make him retreat back behind his walls. I was a lawman in Wyoming territory, had a wife. A daughter on the way. His voice caught almost imperceptibly. They died in a fire while I was away on a manhunt. Our home burned to the ground. Ryder, I'm so sorry, Rose whispered, her heart aching for him. Been writing ever since. Taking odd jobs. Bounty hunting sometimes. He fell silent, and when he spoke again, his voice had regained its hard edge. That's all you get, Miss Hampton. Don't ask for more. I won't, she promised, tears pricking at her eyes for this man who had lost everything. The next morning dawned clear and cold. They broke camp in silence, the intimacy of the night before replaced by Ryder's usual taciturn efficiency. As they approached the mountain pass, Rose noticed he was more alert than usual, his hand never straying far from his gun. Something wrong? She asked. This pass is known to be used by the Blackfoot sometimes, he explained. Most are peaceful these days, but it pays to be cautious. They had just entered the narrowest part of the pass when a shot rang out, the bullet striking the rock face inches from Shadow's head. The horse reared in panic as Ryder drew his gun with lightning speed, pushing Rose down against the horse's neck. "Stay down," he ordered, scanning the high walls of the pass. 3 more shots in rapid succession kicked up dust at Shadow's feet. Ryder fired back, aiming at a flash of movement on the ridge above them. "It's not Indians," he growled. "It's Reed's men. They must have tracked us somehow." "That's impossible," Rose gasped. "You were so careful." "Questions later," Ryder said grimly. "Right now, we run." He dug his heels into Shadow's sides, and the horse bolted forward. More shots followed them, but they were moving too fast for accurate aim. They burst through the other side of the pass and kept riding, Ryder pushing Shadow to his limits until they reached a dense forest where they could disappear among the trees. Only when he was certain they weren't being followed did Ryder finally slow to a walk. Both of them were breathing hard, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. "No," Rose assured him. "But how did they find us?" Ryder's expression was grim. "I'm not sure, but I aim to find out." He surveyed their surroundings. "We're not far from my cabin now. We'll be safer there." As they rode, Rose couldn't help but notice that Ryder seemed more closed off than ever, his jaw tight with tension. She wanted to reach out to him, to thank him for saving her life yet again, but something in his demeanor kept her silent. It was mid-afternoon when they finally reached a small clearing where a sturdy log cabin stood beside a rushing mountain stream. The setting was breathtaking, a hidden valley surrounded by towering peaks, with wildflowers carpeting the ground in vibrant colors. "It's beautiful," Rose said, as Ryder helped her down from the horse. "It's isolated," he replied flatly. "That's what matters." The interior of the cabin was spare but comfortable, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and various necessities hanging from pegs on the walls. It was the home of a man who needed little and expected less. Ryder busied himself with starting a fire and checking his supplies, while Rose stood awkwardly in the center of the room, suddenly unsure of her place in this man's private sanctuary. "You can take the bed," he said, without looking at her. "I'll sleep by the fire." "Thank you," she replied, setting down the small bundle of her possessions. "How long will we stay here?" Ryder straightened, his expression unreadable. "We need to figure out how Reed's men tracked us. Until then, this is the safest place for you." "For us," Rose corrected gently. His eyes met hers briefly before sliding away. "I'll check the perimeter. Make yourself at home." Left alone, Rose explored the cabin, looking for clues about the man who had saved her life. There was little to find, no personal items, no photographs, nothing to suggest that Ryder Ingram had any connection to the world beyond these walls. It was as if he had deliberately erased himself, leaving only the barest outline of a man. When he returned an hour later, his expression was slightly less tense. "No sign of pursuit for now," he reported. "We should be safe here tonight at least." As evening fell, they shared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and coffee. The silence between them was heavy with unasked questions and unspoken thoughts. Finally, Rose could bear it no longer. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I would be dead if not for you." Ryder nodded acknowledgement. "Anyone would have done the same." "No." Rose shook her head. "Most people would have walked away. You didn't." He looked uncomfortable under her gratitude. "Let's just say I understand what it's like to want justice." "Because of your family?" Rose asked softly. Ryder's hand tightened around his coffee cup. "The fire wasn't an accident. It was set by a man I was hunting, his way of sending a message." "Did you ever find him?" "Yes." The single word carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken ones. Rose didn't need to ask what had happened next. It was written in the hardness of Ryder's eyes, in the way his hand unconsciously drifted to the gun at his side. So now you understand why I keep to myself, he continued, his voice flat. Why I don't get involved in other people's troubles. Yet here I am, Rose said quietly. Ryder looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment his carefully constructed walls seemed to waver. Here you are. The next morning, Rose woke to find Ryder already gone, a note on the table informing her that he had gone hunting and would return by midday. She used the time to wash her clothes in the stream and explore the immediate surroundings of the cabin, careful not to stray too far. The day was warm, the mountain air fragrant with pine and wildflowers. Despite the danger that had brought her here, Rose found herself experiencing moments of unexpected peace. This hidden valley seemed removed from the rest of the world, a place where time moved differently. She was preparing a stew from some stored vegetables when Ryder returned, a brace of rabbits in hand. He paused in the doorway, taking in the domestic scene before him with an expression of surprise. You didn't have to cook, he said, setting down his rifle. I wanted to, Rose replied with a small smile. It's the least I can do. They worked together to prepare the meal, and Rose noticed that Ryder seemed more relaxed than before, his movements less guarded. As they ate, she ventured a question she had been considering since the ambush. Do you think someone in Redemption Creek might have told Reed's men which way we went? Ryder nodded thoughtfully. It's possible. Reed has money and influence. He could have people watching all the trails out of town. If that's the case, they might know about this place too. Few people know about this cabin, Ryder assured her, and those who do wouldn't talk. Still, Rose persisted, we can't stay here forever. I need to get to Silverton, and then to Denver. Ryder was silent for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if it held answers. I've been thinking about that, he finally said. There's a small town about a day's ride from here, Elk Hollow. Not much more than a trading post, really. But they have a telegraph. I could send a message to the federal marshal, arrange for him to meet you in Silverton. Hope flared in Rose's chest. You'd do that? It makes sense, Ryder said, his tone practical. Safer than trying to make it all the way to Denver with Reed's men on your trail. Thank you, she said warmly. When can we leave for Elk Hollow? We? Ryder raised an eyebrow. I'll go alone. You'll be safer here. Rose's face fell. But what if something happens to you? What if Reed's men? They won't catch me, he interrupted, his voice confident. I know these mountains better than they ever could. I'll be back before you know it. Rose wanted to argue, but the determined set of his jaw told her it would be futile. At least take this, she said, pulling out the key to the post office box. In case something happens to me, the marshal will need it. Ryder hesitated, then took the key, his fingers brushing against hers. Nothing's going to happen to you, he said firmly. Not while I'm around. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Rose found herself studying Ryder's profile, etched in golden light against the darkness. Despite his gruff exterior, there was something inherently noble about him, a man who had suffered great loss yet still found it in himself to help others. Tell me something about your life before, she said softly. Something happy. Ryder glanced at her, surprise evident in his eyes. For a moment she thought he would refuse, retreat back into silence. But then his expression softened. My wife, Clara, had the most beautiful singing voice you ever heard, he said, his gaze returning to the flames. On summer evenings, she'd sit on our porch and sing, and folks would stop in the street just to listen. Rose smiled, imagining the scene. What did she look like? Auburn hair, eyes blue as cornflowers. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She was tiny, barely came up to my shoulder, but Lord, she had a temper when roused. Wasn't afraid of anything or anyone. She sounds wonderful, Rose said gently. She was. Ryder's voice grew distant. We met when I arrested her brother for drunk and disorderly. She came storming into the jail, reading me the riot act for locking him up. I took one look at her and knew I was a goner. Love at first sight? More like love at first tongue lashing. He chuckled softly, the sound rusty from disuse. Took me 3 months to convince her to have dinner with me. Another 6 before she'd admit she had feelings for me too. Rose laughed. She made you work for it. Best work I ever did. For a moment, the hardness in his eyes gave way to a softer emotion, not quite happiness, but something like fond remembrance. What about you? He asked suddenly. You had a life before all this too. Rose hugged her knees to her chest. Not much to tell. After my father died, I moved to Redemption Creek to start fresh. Took the job at the hotel because it came with a room. Made friends. Tried to build something for myself. Her voice turned bitter. And then I saw what kind of man Harrison Reed really was. What will you do after? Ryder asked. Once the ledger is in the marshal's hands? Rose hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. I don't know, she admitted. I can't go back to Redemption Creek. You could go anywhere, Ryder suggested. Denver, San Francisco. Start over again. I suppose? Rose looked at him curiously. What about you? Will you stay here forever? Ryder poked at the fire, sending sparks flying. Never thought much beyond the next day. Been that way for 5 years now. Maybe it's time to start, Rose said softly. Their eyes met across the fire, and for one breathless moment something electric passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had both lost everything, yet somehow kept going. Then Ryder stood abruptly. I should turn in. Long ride to El Calo tomorrow. Rose nodded, disappointed but understanding. Good night, Ryder. Good night, Rose. It was the first time he had called her by her first name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. Ryder left at dawn the next morning, promising to return by nightfall the following day. Rose watched him ride away, Shadow's powerful strides carrying him swiftly down the valley until he disappeared into the trees. The cabin felt strangely empty without his presence, though she had known him for just a few days. To keep herself occupied, Rose cleaned the cabin thoroughly, gathered firewood, and even attempted to patch a hole in one of Ryder's shirts she found hanging on a peg. As evening approached, she found herself growing increasingly uneasy, constantly looking out the window as if expecting trouble. Just as she was about to bar the door for the night, she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats, multiple horses moving fast. Her heart leaped to her throat. Ryder wouldn't be back yet, and he certainly wouldn't be traveling with others. Rose grabbed Ryder's spare revolver from above the fireplace and ducked behind the heavy wooden table, which she quickly overturned for cover. Her hands shook as she checked that the gun was loaded, just as Ryder had shown her during their journey. The riders stopped outside the cabin. There was a moment of silence. Then a man's voice called out. Miss Hampton, we know you're in there. Come out now, and no one needs to get hurt. Rose held her breath, her mind racing. How had they found her? And where was Ryder? Mr. Reed just wants what belongs to him, the voice continued. Give us the ledger and the key, and we'll be on our way. The ledger isn't here, Rose called back, trying to keep her voice steady. And neither is the key. A different voice laughed a cold, ugly sound. Then I guess we'll just have to wait for your friend to return. I'm sure he can tell us where they are. Rose's blood ran cold. They knew about Ryder. They might even have intercepted him on his way to El Calo. He won't tell you anything, she said defiantly. Everyone talks eventually, Miss Hampton, the first voice replied ominously. Now, we're coming in. Don't do anything foolish. Rose steadied the revolver, aiming at the door. When it burst open, she fired without hesitation, the shot going wide but sending the men diving for cover. They returned fire, bullets splintering the wooden walls of the cabin as Rose crouched lower behind the table. There was a lull in the shooting. "That was stupid, Miss Hampton," the voice called, now hard with anger. "We were willing to be reasonable. Now we do this the hard way." Rose heard the sound of breaking glass, then the unmistakable smell of kerosene filled the air, followed by the whoosh of flames catching on dry wood. They were burning her out. Panic threatened to overwhelm her as smoke began to fill the small cabin. Rose knew she had only moments before the entire structure would be engulfed. She had to make a choice: stay and burn, or run out into the open where Reed's men waited. Taking a deep breath, she decided on a third option. The cabin had a small window at the back, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. If she could reach it unseen, she might have a chance to escape into the forest. Keeping low to avoid both bullets and thickening smoke, Rose crawled toward the rear of the cabin. The fire was spreading rapidly, the heat becoming unbearable. Just as she reached the window, a section of the burning roof collapsed behind her, missing her by inches. With desperate strength, Rose forced the window open and pulled herself through, tumbling to the ground outside. She scrambled to her feet and ran for the tree line, expecting at any moment to feel the impact of a bullet in her back. But the men were still focused on the front of the cabin, unaware of her escape. Rose plunged into the forest, running blindly, guided only by instinct and the desperate need to put distance between herself and her pursuers. She had no plan beyond immediate survival. Ryder was somewhere out there, possibly in danger himself. She had no supplies, no horse, only the clothes on her back and the revolver clutched in her hand. Night was falling, and the mountain temperatures would drop rapidly. After what felt like hours of running and stumbling through the darkening forest, Rose finally collapsed beside a fallen log, her lungs burning and her legs trembling with exhaustion. From her position, she could see the glow of the burning cabin in the distance, a beacon of destruction in the gathering darkness. Tears streamed down her face as she thought of Ryder's sanctuary reduced to ashes, just as his family home had been. Another loss for a man who had already lost too much. And it was her fault. Rose huddled against the log, trying to conserve warmth as the night grew colder. Sleep was impossible. Every sound in the forest made her start, certain that Reed's men were closing in. As the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, she made a decision. She would make her way to Elk Hollow on foot. It was her only chance of finding help, or finding Ryder. She had just risen stiffly to her feet when she heard the sound of a horse approaching slowly through the trees. Rose raised the revolver with shaking hands, prepared to fight to the last. Then the rider came into view, and the gun nearly fell from her grasp. "Ryder," she breathed. He was slumped in the saddle, one hand pressed to his side where his shirt was dark with blood. At the sound of her voice, he lifted his head, his face pale but his eyes lighting with relief. "Rose." He reined Shadow to a halt. "Thank God. I saw the cabin burning. I thought—" "I got out the back window," she explained quickly, moving to his side. "You're hurt." "It's not bad," he grunted, though his drawn face told a different story. "Reed's men ambushed me on the way back from Elk Hollow. I managed to lose them, but not before one of them got lucky." Rose helped him dismount, alarmed at how heavily he leaned on her. "We need to tend that wound." "No time," Ryder insisted. "Those men who burned the cabin, they'll be searching for you. We need to keep moving." "You're in no condition to travel," Rose argued. "Don't have a choice." His green eyes fixed on hers, intense despite his pain. "I won't let them get you, Rose. I promise to keep you safe." The determination in his voice silenced her protests. Together, they mounted Shadow, Ryder in the saddle and Rose behind him, her arms around his waist to steady him. As they rode, she could feel the warm stickiness of blood seeping through his shirt. "Where are we going?" she asked, her lips close to his ear. "There's an old mining camp about 10 miles north of here," he replied, his voice strained. "Abandoned years ago. We can hole up there while I recover. Rose tightened her hold on him, feeling his strength flagging. Just stay with me, Ryder, she whispered. Please stay with me. They traveled slowly, every step of the horse causing Ryder to tense with pain. Rose found herself praying as she had never prayed before for his survival, for their escape, for some miracle that would see them through this nightmare. It was nearly noon when they reached the abandoned mining camp, a collection of dilapidated wooden structures nestled in a narrow canyon. Ryder directed her to the largest building, which had once been the assay office. "Help me down," he said, his voice alarmingly weak. Rose supported him as best she could, guiding him into the building and easing him down onto a dusty cot in one corner. In the better light, she could see how pale he was, his normally sun-bronzed face now ashen. "I need to see the wound," she said firmly. Ryder didn't protest as she carefully unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a nasty bullet wound just below his ribs. It was still bleeding sluggishly, the flesh around it angry and red. "The bullet went through," he told her. "That's good. Less chance of infection." "We need to clean it and stop the bleeding," Rose said, fighting to keep her voice steady despite her fear. "Do you have any supplies in your saddlebags?" Ryder nodded weakly. "Whiskey, clean bandages, some herbs my Clara used to use for wounds." Rose hurried to retrieve the items along with a canteen of water. As she worked to clean and dress the wound, Ryder watched her through half-closed eyes. "You've done this before," he observed. "My father, remember? I assisted him sometimes." Rose concentrated on her task, willing her hands not to shake. "This is going to hurt," she warned, uncorking the whiskey bottle. Ryder gritted his teeth as she poured the alcohol over the wound. "Wouldn't be the first time," he managed to say. When she had finished bandaging him, Rose helped him drink some water and take a few sips of whiskey for the pain. "You need to rest now," she told him. "Save your strength." "Can't rest," he argued weakly. "Need to keep watch." "I'll keep watch," Rose insisted. "You taught me how to use this, remember?" She patted the revolver tucked into her belt. Ryder looked like he wanted to protest, but exhaustion and blood loss were taking their toll. His eyes drifted closed despite his efforts to keep them open. "Just for a little while," he murmured. "Wake me at the first sign of trouble." "I will," Rose promised, though she had no intention of disturbing his much-needed rest unless absolutely necessary. As Ryder slept, Rose secured the building as best she could, blocking the windows and barricading the door, leaving only a small opening for observation. She settled herself near it with the revolver in her lap, keeping vigil as the hours passed. By evening, Ryder's condition had worsened. He was burning with fever, occasionally muttering incoherently in his restless sleep. Rose bathed his face with cool water from the canteen, trying to bring his temperature down. "Clara," he called out suddenly, his eyes open but unfocused. "Clara, take Rebecca and run." "Shh," Rose soothed, stroking his sweat-damp hair back from his forehead. "It's all right. You're safe." His fevered gaze fixed on her face. "Rose, you're still here." "Of course I'm still here," she said softly. "Where else would I be?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Thought maybe I dreamed you." "No," she assured him, her own smile tremulous. "I'm real." "Good," he murmured, his eyes closing again. "That's good." Rose continued her ministrations through the night, alternating between tending to Ryder and keeping watch for any sign of pursuers. By dawn, his fever had broken, and he slept more peacefully, his breathing stronger and more regular. She must have dozed off herself because the next thing Rose knew, a hand was gently shaking her shoulder. She startled awake to find Ryder sitting up on the cot, still pale but clear-eyed. "Your turn to rest," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I'll take watch now." "You should be lying down," she protested. I've had worse, he assured her. And you look dead on your feet. Too exhausted to argue, Rose took his place on the cot, falling asleep almost instantly to the comforting sound of Ryder moving quietly about the room, his presence a shield between her and the dangers outside. When she woke hours later, she found him seated by the window, cleaning his revolver with practiced efficiency. He looked up as she stirred. "How are you feeling?" she asked, sitting up and pushing her tangled hair from her face. "Better," he replied. "Thanks to you." His eyes held hers for a long moment. "You saved my life, Rose." She shook her head. "You saved mine first, several times over." A faint smile touched his lips. "Then I guess we're even." "Not quite." Rose stood and walked over to him. "I still owe you for a cabin?" Ryder shrugged. "It was just a place. 4 walls and a roof." "It was your home." "Was," he agreed. Hadn't felt much like home for a long time, though. There was something different in his voice, in the way he looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Or perhaps seeing something in himself that had been hidden. "I managed to send that telegram before the ambush," he told her, changing the subject. "The marshal will meet us in Silverton in 3 days." Hope surged through Rose. "You're still coming with me?" "All the way," Ryder confirmed. "I don't leave things half done." "And after?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Ryder's expression grew thoughtful. "After is something I haven't considered in a long time." He studied her face. "Maybe it's time I did." The next day, Ryder was strong enough to travel, though Rose insisted he ride while she walked beside Shadow. They moved cautiously, avoiding main trails and keeping to the cover of forests when possible. As they journeyed, something subtle shifted between them. The walls Ryder had built around himself seemed to be crumbling, brick by brick. He spoke more freely, shared stories of his years as a lawman, even laughed once or twice at Rose's attempts to lighten the mood. By the time they made camp that evening, Rose felt as if she was seeing the man Ryder had once been the man he might be again, given time and healing. "Tell me about your dreams," she said as they sat by their small fire, sheltered in a grove of aspens. Before everything changed, Ryder was quiet for so long that Rose thought he wouldn't answer. Then, softly, he said, "I wanted a big family, a house full of children's laughter, land of my own someday when I'd had enough of wearing a badge." "Simple dreams," Rose observed, "but good ones." "What about you?" he asked. What did Rose Hampton want from life before Harrison Reed came along? She smiled wistfully. "Not so different from you, I suppose. A home, family, someone to share it all with." She poked at the fire with a stick. "My father always said I was too independent for my own good, that I'd never find a man who could keep up with me." "Your father underestimated the men of the world," Ryder said, his eyes catching hers across the flames. "Or overestimated them." Rose felt a flush rise to her cheeks under his steady gaze. Perhaps he did. The next morning, they continued their journey, angling northwest toward Silverton. By Ryder's estimation, they would reach the town by the following afternoon, in time for the meeting with the federal marshal. As they rode, Ryder now insisting that they both mount Shadow to make better time, Rose found herself torn between relief that their ordeal was nearly over and a strange reluctance to reach its end. What would happen once the ledger was safely in the marshal's hands? Would Ryder simply tip his hat and ride away? The thought brought an unexpected ache to her chest. They were crossing a high meadow, wildflowers nodding in the breeze, when Ryder suddenly reined Shadow to a halt, his body tensing. "What is it?" Rose asked, alarmed. "Riders," he said tersely, "coming fast from the south." Rose turned to look. In the distance, she could make out 5 horsemen galloping toward them, dust rising from their horses' hooves. "Reed's men," she whispered. "Hold on," Ryder ordered, turning Shadow toward a stand of pines at the edge of the meadow. They had almost reached the tree line when the first shots rang out. Shadow leaped forward, powerful muscles bunching as he raced for cover. Once within the shelter of the forest, Ryder dismounted swiftly, helping Rose down. "Take Shadow and keep going north," he instructed, drawing his revolver. "There's a trail through these trees that will lead you to Silverton. The marshal will be waiting at the Silver Dollar Saloon." "What about you?" Rose demanded, clutching his arm. "I'll hold them off. Give you time to get away." "No." The word burst from her with unexpected force. "I won't leave you to face them alone." Ryder's expression softened. "Rose, I can't protect you if I'm worrying about keeping you safe in a gunfight." "And I can't leave the man I love to die for me," she replied, the words tumbling out before she could consider them. Ryder stared at her, momentarily speechless. "Rose." The sound of approaching riders broke the moment. "We don't have time to argue," Rose said firmly. "Either we both go, or we both stay and fight." A complex series of emotions crossed Ryder's face: frustration, admiration, and something deeper that made her heart skip. Finally, he nodded. "Together, then. But when I tell you to run, you run. No arguments." "Deal," she agreed, relief flooding through her. They secured Shadow deeper in the forest, then took up defensive positions behind a fallen log. The riders had dismounted at the edge of the trees and were advancing cautiously on foot. "5 against 2, Ryder murmured. "Not great odds." "I've seen you shoot," Rose replied. "I like our chances." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "On my signal, aim for the man on the far left. I'll take the others." Rose steadied her revolver on the log, sighting down the barrel as Ryder had taught her. When his low whistle sounded, she squeezed the trigger, the recoil jarring her arms. Her target cried out, clutching his shoulder as he fell. Ryder fired in rapid succession, dropping 2 more men before the remaining pair could scramble for cover. A furious exchange of gunfire followed, bullets splintering wood and thudding into trees around them. "They're trying to circle around behind us," Ryder warned, his voice tense. "We need to move." They retreated deeper into the forest, using the trees for cover as they fired back at their pursuers. Rose's heart pounded in her ears, fear and determination warring within her. She had never imagined herself in a gunfight, yet here she was, fighting for her life and for Ryder's. A bullet grazed her arm, the sudden burn making her gasp. Ryder was at her side instantly. "Are you hit?" "It's nothing," she assured him, though blood was seeping through her torn sleeve. "Just a scratch." His eyes darkened with anger. "Stay here," he ordered, moving forward with deadly purpose. Before Rose could protest, Ryder had vanished among the trees. Seconds later, she heard 2 shots in quick succession, then silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Rose waited, revolver ready, her injured arm throbbing. "Rose." Ryder's voice came from her left. "It's over." She sagged with relief as he appeared, a fresh cut on his cheek but otherwise unharmed. "All of them?" He nodded grimly. "All of them? But more will come if Reed is still breathing." He examined her arm with gentle fingers. "We need to get you to Silverton. Get this treated properly." Rose touched his cheek, her fingers coming away with a smear of blood. "You're hurt too." "It's nothing." He echoed her earlier words, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Just a scratch." Their eyes met, and suddenly they were laughing, a release of tension that bordered on hysteria, but felt wonderful nonetheless. When the laughter subsided, Ryder's expression grew serious. "Did you mean what you said?" he asked quietly. "About loving me?" Rose's heart thundered in her chest, but she met his gaze steadily. "Yes, I know it's fast, and maybe foolish, but—" She didn't get to finish. Ryder closed the distance between them, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that sent warmth coursing through her entire body. His arms circled her waist, drawing her against him as her hands slid up to his shoulders. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "Not foolish," he murmured. "Brave. Everything about you is brave, Rose Hampton." "Does that mean—" She couldn't quite voice the question. "It means I love you too," he said simply. "God help me, I didn't think I'd ever say those words again. Didn't think I deserved to. But you've given me something I thought was gone forever, hope." Rose felt tears spring to her eyes. "What happens now?" "Now," Ryder said, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. "We get to Silverton, meet the marshal, and put Harrison Reed behind bars where he belongs." His eyes held a promise. "And then, if you'll have me, we figure out what comes next. Together." "Together," Rose echoed, her heart full to bursting. "I like the sound of that." They reached Silverton the following afternoon without further incident. The small mining town bustled with activity, its main street lined with saloons, mercantiles, and boarding houses catering to the miners and travelers passing through. The Silver Dollar Saloon was easy to find, a large two-story building with elaborate painted windows and a swinging sign featuring a silver coin. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of whiskey. Rose felt conspicuous as they entered, aware of curious glances from the predominantly male patrons. Ryder's hand at the small of her back was reassuring as he guided her toward a corner table where a solitary man sat nursing a drink. He was middle-aged with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed mustache, his clothing plain but well-made. The badge pinned to his vest identified him as U.S. Marshal Everett Thompson. "Ingram," the marshal acknowledged as they approached, "and this must be Miss Hampton." "Marshal," Ryder nodded. "Thank you for coming." Thompson gestured for them to sit. "Your telegram was intriguing, to say the least. You say you have evidence of corruption against Harrison Reed?" "Yes," Rose confirmed, retrieving the key from her bodice. "The ledger is in box 27 at the post office." The marshal's eyebrows rose. "Smart. Let's go retrieve it, shall we?" The postmaster seemed surprised but compliant when presented with Thompson's badge. The ledger, when recovered, proved to be exactly as Rose had described, a detailed record of bribes, extortion, land theft, and even murder spanning more than a decade. "This is damning," Thompson said as he flipped through the pages. "More than enough to put Reed away for good." He looked up at Rose. "You've done a brave thing, Miss Hampton, and a dangerous one." "I had help," she replied, her hand finding Ryder's beneath the table. "I'll need you both to give statements," the marshal continued. "Then I'll telegraph for deputies to arrest Reed and his associates in Redemption Creek." "What about the men who tried to kill us?" Ryder asked. "Dead men can't stand trial," Thompson said pragmatically. "But their actions will be added to Reed's charges. Self-defense is clear in this case." It took 2 days to complete all the necessary paperwork and statements. During that time, Rose and Ryder took a room at the Silverton Hotel, separate rooms. At Rose's insistence, though they spent most of their waking hours together. On the evening of the second day, they stood on the hotel balcony watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Marshal Thompson received confirmation that Reed has been arrested," Ryder informed her. "It's over, Rose. You're free." Rose leaned against the railing, letting the news sink in. "It doesn't feel quite real yet." "It will." Ryder stood beside her, their shoulders touching. "What will you do now?" She turned to look at him. "That depends on you." "On me?" His eyebrows rose in question. "On whether you meant what you said in the forest," Rose clarified. "About figuring things out together." Ryder's expression softened. "I meant every word." "Then that's what I'll do," she said simply. "Be with you, wherever that takes us." He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. I've been thinking about that. I'm not the same man I was 5 years ago, Rose. That man died with Clara and Rebecca. But maybe there's still something worth salvaging. There is, Rose said firmly. I've seen it. Ryder nodded slowly. I received a letter while we were waiting for the marshal, from an old friend in Wyoming Territory. He's the sheriff in a growing town called Willow Creek. Says they need a deputy, someone with experience. Hope bloomed in Rose's chest. Are you considering it? I am. It would mean going back to wearing a badge, to the life I left behind. But with you beside me? He searched her face. It wouldn't be the same. It would be something new. I like new. Rose smiled. I've always wanted to see Wyoming. Ryder's green eyes crinkled at the corners. It's beautiful country. Good place to put down roots. Maybe build that house I always wanted. With a big porch for summer evenings, Rose added. And plenty of room for those children's voices, Ryder said softly, his meaning clear in his gaze. Rose felt her cheeks flush, but her heart soared. That sounds perfect. Ryder drew her close, his arms encircling her waist. There's something I need to ask you first, Rose Hampton. Yes, she breathed, though she already knew the question. Will you marry me? Not right away, he added quickly. We can take our time, get to know each other properly. But I know what I feel, and I don't want to waste any more years waiting for happiness to find me. Rose reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the scar along his jawline. Yes, Ryder Ingram, I will marry you, and we'll build that new life together, one day at a time. His kiss was tender, a promise sealed beneath the painted sky. When they finally drew apart, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. I never expected to find love again, he murmured. Never thought I deserved it. Everyone deserves a second chance, Rose replied. Even broken cowboys with guns at their sides who say, don't ask. Ryder laughed softly. I'm glad you didn't listen when I told you not to ask questions. And I'm glad you stayed, Rose said, just like you promised. 2 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Rose Hampton became Rose Ingram in a simple ceremony at the small church in Willow Creek, Wyoming. The town had welcomed them warmly, Ryder as their new deputy sheriff and Rose as the teacher for the growing number of children in the settlement. They built a house on the edge of town with a wide porch that caught the evening sun and a view of rolling hills that stretched to the distant mountains. True to his word, Ryder had given Rose time to be sure of her heart, though it had taken less than a week of proper courting for her to know with absolute certainty that this was the man she wanted to spend her life with. On their wedding night, as they lay tangled in each other's arms, Rose traced the outline of the silver badge that Ryder had placed on the bedside table. Do you ever regret going back to it? She asked softly. After everything that happened? Ryder considered the question, his hand absently stroking her bare shoulder. No, he said finally. It feels right this time, like I'm doing it for the right reasons. And what are those reasons? Rose propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. His green eyes, once so hard and distant, now gazed at her with undisguised love. To make this town safe for my wife, for the family we'll have someday. He pulled her closer. To be the kind of man you deserve. You already are that man, Rose assured him, resting her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. You always were. Ryder's arms tightened around her. I love you, Rose Ingram. And I love you, she whispered, closing her eyes in contentment. Always. 1 year to the day after they first met in that dusty alley in Redemption Creek, Rose placed their newborn daughter in Ryder's arms. They named her Clara Rebecca Ingram, honoring the past while embracing their future. As Ryder gazed down at his daughter's tiny face, wonder and love transforming his features, Rose knew that both of them had finally found what they had been searching for, not just love, but healing. A chance to build something lasting from the broken pieces of their lives. In the years that followed, their family grew, their home filled with the children's laughter that Ryder had once dreamed of. Willow Creek prospered, becoming known throughout the territory as a peaceful, law-abiding town under Sheriff Ingram's watchful eye. And every night, Rose would sit on their porch and watch the sunset, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought a wounded cowboy with a gun at his side into her life. Sometimes, when the memories of their first meeting arose, Ryder would pull Rose into his arms and whisper, "Don't ask," in her ear. And she would always reply, smiling against his lips, "I won't, if you stay. Forever," he would promise, before kissing her with all the love and passion that had carried them from that desperate moment of danger to this peaceful life they had built together. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.